An actress vanished without a trace in 1984, leaving behind only questions and heartbreak. But 18 years later, construction workers find her abandoned car under a rockslide, and what they discover makes their blood run cold. The setting sun painted the cypress trees along Highway 1 in golden hues, as Emma Sullivan organized her belongings in the makeshift dressing room of the Golden Bough Theater. At 25, with her auburn hair and magnetic smile, she had just completed her final performance as a supporting actress in a local production of Waiting for Godot. Humming softly, she carefully placed her makeup in a small case, her mind already racing ahead to tomorrow's audition for an NBC series in Los Angeles. "You absolutely killed it tonight," said Marcus, one of her fellow actors, leaning against the doorframe. "Those NBC executives would be fools not to cast you." Emma smiled, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. "Let's hope they see what you see." Throughout Monterey, Emma Sullivan was known as the local girl on the verge of making it big. When she wasn't performing, she worked weekends as a waitress at the Nepenthe restaurant in Big Sur, where regular customers often asked when they'd see her on television. "Soon," she'd always answer with a confident smile. "Very soon." In the Sullivan family home in Pacific Grove, Diana Sullivan carefully cut another newspaper clipping that mentioned her eldest daughter. The small article from the Monterey Herald praised Emma's natural charisma in the latest Golden Bough production. Diana smiled as she meticulously pasted it into the scrapbook she'd maintained since Emma's first school play at 12. "She's going to get that part," Diana said to her husband Robert, who was watching the evening news from his recliner. "Our Emma always knew what she wanted." Across the room, 19-year-old Melissa Sullivan glanced up from her textbook spread across the kitchen table, then at the clock. It was Tuesday, October 16th, 1984, the eve of what could be the most important audition of her sister's budding career. "Did Emma call yet?" Melissa asked, chewing on her pencil. "She promised to help me with my Shakespeare essay when she got home. She's probably still celebrating with the cast," Robert replied, his eyes not leaving the television. "You know how those theater folks are after a closing night." The following morning arrived with a crisp autumn breeze. Emma emerged from the house dressed in jeans, a white cotton blouse, and her favorite leather jacket. Her red Mustang convertible, a graduation gift her parents had saved years to purchase, gleamed in the driveway. "Everything's in your overnight bag?" Diana asked, following her daughter to the car. "Script, resume, emergency cash?" Emma laughed, tossing her bag onto the passenger seat where her heavily marked audition script already waited. "Mom, I've done this before. I'll be fine." "Call as soon as you're finished," Diana called from the porch as Emma backed out of the driveway, her hand raised in a confident wave before disappearing around the bend. At 3:42 that afternoon, the telephone rang in the Sullivan house. Diana answered it on the first ring, hearing her daughter's voice bubbling with excitement. "Mom, they loved me. The producer said I have exactly what they're looking for in the younger sister role. They'll call by the end of the week, but the casting assistant told me on my way out that it's practically a sure thing." Diana could hear Los Angeles traffic in the background as Emma continued breathlessly, "I'm leaving now. I stopped at that winery Dad loves in Napa and bought a Chardonnay to celebrate. I should be home before midnight, okay? Are you sure you don't want to wait until tomorrow, sweetheart?" Diana cautioned. "The Highway 1 can be dangerous at night, especially with that rain they're forecasting." "Don't worry, Mom. I want to get home tonight. I can't wait to tell you all the details in person. Besides, I've driven that road 1,000 times." It was the last time Diana would hear her daughter's voice. By midnight, Robert and Diana were still awake in the living room, periodically glancing out the window at the silent street. Melissa had fallen asleep on the sofa, a textbook open on her lap. The late news announced an unexpectedly strong storm hitting the Central California coast, with landslides reported along Highway 1. "She must have stopped at a motel," Robert tried to reassure Diana, who was repeatedly dialing Emma's new cellular phone. an expensive novelty in 1984 that their daughter had purchased with her first significant acting paycheck. At 3:27 in the morning, Diana jerked awake from a fitful doze in the armchair. "Something's happened to my girl on that road," she whispered to Robert, her hands shaking so badly she could barely dial the police number. The officer who answered was kind but firm. Emma was an adult, had been gone less than 24 hours, and given the weather conditions, had probably sought shelter. They would file a report, but no search would begin before the regulatory 48 hours. Diana hung up the phone, unconsoled. She would have called Robert. You know how responsible she is. At dawn, Robert and his younger brother Thomas departed toward Los Angeles, tracing the route Emma would have taken. Diana remained home with Melissa, phoning hospitals, police stations, and every motel along Highway 1 she could locate in the phone book. When night fell again with no news, the first reporters appeared at the Sullivans' door. The beloved waitress from Nepenthe, promising actress and daughter of a respected family in the community, had vanished. The first photo of Emma's radiant smile appeared on the front page of the Monterey Herald the next morning. Local actress disappears during storm. By the third day, Monterey County Sheriff James Harrington personally coordinated searches, with helicopters flying over the most dangerous stretches of Highway 1. Volunteer firefighters and local residents formed groups to examine every rest area, vista point, and beach access along the road. We've found several vehicles damaged by the storm, but no red Mustang so far, Harrington informed the Sullivans during a visit to their home, now transformed into an impromptu command center with maps, phone lists, and Emma's photos spread across the kitchen table. A week after the disappearance, the first theories began circulating. A gas station attendant in San Simeon reported seeing a young woman resembling Emma arguing with a man in a blue truck. A waitress in Cambria believed she had served her around 10 o'clock that night, accompanied by an older man. A German tourist couple sent in a photo where, in the background, there appeared to be a red Mustang parked near a road construction area. Each lead led to a dead end. The blue truck man was a local plumber with a confirmed alibi. The waitress had confused Emma with another customer. The car in the tourist's photo was a Corvette. As days turned into weeks, Diana observed Emma's untouched room, the Stanislavski and Meisner acting books on the shelf, the dress she planned to wear to the NBC series premiere if she got the part, the Calvin Klein Obsession perfume on her dresser. On the wall hung a framed poster of Meryl Streep in Sophie's Choice with the dedication Emma had written to herself. Someday, me too. When November arrived and the phone calls diminished, Diana found Melissa crying quietly in Emma's room, holding the teddy bear the sisters had shared in childhood. "She's coming back, isn't she, Mom?" Melissa asked, her voice breaking. Diana embraced her younger daughter, allowing herself to cry for the first time since the disappearance. "We have to keep believing, sweetheart. Your sister is out there somewhere." As the first theories began to circulate, the Sullivan family had no way of knowing that each seemingly promising lead would only take them further from the dark truth, buried along with Emma's red Mustang, somewhere along California's rugged coastline. 2 years after Emma's disappearance, the once vibrant Sullivan home had become a shadow of its former self. The kitchen, once filled with laughter and spirited debates around the dinner table, now echoed with silence, broken only by the occasional clinking of utensils against plates. Robert Sullivan, who had once been known throughout Monterey for his easy smile and infectious enthusiasm, rarely spoke during meals, mechanically consuming whatever Diana placed before him. In the Monterey County Sheriff's Office, a young administrative assistant carried a manila folder labeled Sullivan, Emma Rose, Missing Person, down a dimly lit corridor. With practiced indifference, he deposited the file into a metal cabinet in the basement archives, alongside dozens of other unsolved cases. The thick folder, containing witness statements, search reports, and photographs, landed with a dull thud that seemed to symbolize the case's descent into bureaucratic obscurity. "Just another cold case now," he muttered to himself, closing the drawer with a metallic clang. Diana Sullivan refused to accept this reality. The Sullivan living room had transformed into an impromptu command center with large-scale maps of Highway 1 pinned to the walls, highlighted with potential routes Emma might have taken. Lists of phone numbers, hospitals, motels, police stations across 3 counties covered the coffee table, many entries crossed out and then rechecked months later. "They've simply given up on her," Diana said bitterly one evening during the monthly meeting of the support group she had formed for families of missing persons in Monterey. "To the sheriff's department, she's just a statistic now." The dozen attendees nodded sympathetically in the church basement where they gathered. Each carried their own burden of uncertainty, a missing son, daughter, spouse, each understanding the peculiar torture of not knowing. Diana had become their unofficial leader, channeling her anguish into advocacy. On a rainy Tuesday evening marking the 1-year anniversary of Emma's disappearance, Diana organized a candlelight walk along Monterey's waterfront. Nearly 200 people attended, many carrying laminated photos of Emma's beaming face. Local news cameras captured the solemn procession, briefly reigniting public interest in the case. It was there that Martin Wells approached Diana for the first time. The former San Francisco detective, now working as a private investigator, specializing in missing persons cases, waited until the crowd had dispersed before introducing himself. "Mrs. Sullivan," he said, his weathered face serious beneath salt and pepper hair, "I've been reviewing your daughter's case, and I've found some inconsistencies that deserve a second look." Initially skeptical, Robert watched from the kitchen doorway the following spring as Wells spread photographs and reports across their kitchen table. Melissa leaned forward, intently studying every document. "The storm that night caused damage primarily north of Big Sur, but Emma should have been coming from the south," Wells explained, pointing to weather reports. "Plus, there's something odd about the highway maintenance records from that week." "What do you mean?" asked Melissa, who had transferred to a local college to stay close to her parents. In the 2 years since Emma's disappearance, she had become increasingly involved in the search, even creating a quarterly newsletter distributed throughout coastal California with updates on her sister's case. Caltrans had crews working at 3 different points along the route Emma would have taken. One supervisor reported seeing a red Mustang parked at a lookout point around 9 p.m., but later retracted his statement. This new information temporarily revived the sheriff department's interest, but interviews with Caltrans employees yielded nothing conclusive. The supervisor who had mentioned the Mustang now insisted he had confused it with another vehicle. While the investigation stalled again, life in the Sullivan household continued its painful evolution. Diana maintained Emma's room exactly as she had left it, dusting it weekly as if her daughter might return any moment. Each Sunday morning, she would carefully change the sheets, spray Emma's favorite perfume in the air, and adjust the framed headshots on the dresser, a ritual that had become almost religious in its precision. Dinner times grew increasingly tense. Diana still set a place for Emma at the table, the empty chair a stark reminder of their loss. Robert would barely touch his food, while Diana animatedly discussed potential new leads that invariably led nowhere. "I spoke with a psychic in Santa Cruz today," Diana announced one evening. "She says Emma is near water and metal. That could be a marina, or maybe a junkyard near the coast." Robert put down his fork with deliberate care. "Diana, we've been through this. Those people just take advantage of desperate families." "At least they're trying to help," Diana snapped. "Unlike you, who seems to have given up entirely." Melissa stared at her plate, having witnessed countless variations of this same argument over the past months. Later that night, Robert and Diana's bedroom door failed to muffle their voices. "We can't live like this forever, Diana. It's been 3 years." "Are you giving up on her, Robert? Is that it?" Melissa slipped out to her car, tears streaming down her face as she called her Uncle Thomas. "I'm losing my whole family, not just Emma," she sobbed into the phone. By the spring of 1990, the relationship between Diana and Robert had deteriorated beyond repair. The weight of unresolved grief had created a chasm between them that neither could bridge. Robert, who had begun tentatively suggesting that perhaps it was time to move forward, packed several boxes and moved to a small apartment a few blocks away. "I'm not abandoning Emma," he explained to Melissa during a tense lunch at a seaside restaurant. "I just can't live in a shrine anymore. Your mother refuses to consider any possibility except finding Emma alive, and after 6 years..." Melissa nodded, understanding the burden her father carried. "You think she's dead, don't you?" Robert looked out the restaurant window at the turquoise ocean that defined both the beauty and danger of their town. "I think we need to accept that possibility, sweetheart, for our own sanity." While the Sullivan family's relationship fractured under the strain of Emma's disappearance, none of them realized they were being watched. Caltrans supervisor James Saunders meticulously noted every media appearance by the Sullivan family, every new investigation, every breath of hope, knowing his own future depended on keeping buried not just Emma, but the dark truth about what really happened that rainy night on Highway 1. James Saunders meticulously documented every media appearance by the Sullivan family, carefully filing newspaper clippings and video recordings in a locked cabinet in his home office. What had begun as vigilance had evolved into obsession. Each new investigation into Emma's disappearance threatened to unravel the careful fabrication he had maintained for 6 years. As he watched Diana Sullivan's increasingly prominent television appearances, his hand would unconsciously move to the small scar on his temple, a permanent reminder of that rainy night on Highway 1. By 1990, the Sullivan family home on Pine Avenue had become a place defined more by absence than presence. Robert Sullivan's departure that spring marked the final fracture in a family that had once been the envy of their neighbors. Diana, now alone in the 3-bedroom house save for Melissa's occasional visits, transformed her grief into relentless activism. Early on a Tuesday morning, Diana carefully applied makeup before driving to San Francisco for an appearance on Unsolved Mysteries. She wore a blue blouse that Emma had once complimented, and around her neck hung a silver locket containing not the professional headshot of her daughter, but a candid photo from Christmas 1983. Emma laughing as she unwrapped a gift, her green eyes alight with genuine joy. "This isn't the photo most people would choose," Diana explained to the sympathetic producer before filming, "but this is my Emma, full of life, unguarded, real. This is who I'm looking for." At the Monterey Herald, Melissa Sullivan had found her own way to keep her sister's memory alive. 6 years after completing her journalism degree, she had risen to become a respected reporter, specializing in stories about missing persons and unsolved crimes. "I need those statistics on California disappearances by tomorrow, not next week," she called across the newsroom, surrounded by notes about her sister's case that served as constant inspiration. Her desk featured a framed photo of herself and Emma as teenagers, arms wrapped around each other on Carmel Beach, their matching Sullivan smiles radiant in the sunlight. That summer, Diana attended a national convention for families of missing persons in Chicago, where she had been invited as a keynote speaker. Her advocacy work had transformed her from a grieving mother into a recognized expert on navigating the complex bureaucracy surrounding missing persons cases. "The first 48 hours are crucial," she told the audience of hundreds, many clutching photos of their own missing loved ones. "But the next 6,000 hours matter too. Every phone call, every letter to officials, every media appearance, they all keep your loved one's case alive in the public consciousness." Meanwhile, Robert Sullivan was slowly rebuilding his life in a small apartment overlooking the harbor. On a foggy Sunday morning, he sat drinking tea with Christine Phillips, a kindergarten teacher he had met at a community fundraiser. "Emma would have been 31 this year," he said quietly, watching sailboats drift through the mist. "Sometimes I try to imagine what she would look like now, how her career might have developed." Christine covered his hand with hers, offering silent support. Unlike others who grew uncomfortable with mentions of Emma, she understood that Robert's healing didn't mean forgetting his daughter. Everything changed on a Tuesday evening in October 1994. Diana had just returned from appearing on a regional television program when the phone rang. Rather than the usual sympathetic caller offering prayers or a dubious tip, a male voice, low and raspy, spoke with unsettling certainty. "Your daughter saw something she shouldn't have that night," the voice said without preamble. "Look into Caltrans records about material disposal along the coast in October 1984. Before Diana could ask for clarification, the line went dead. Her hands trembling, she immediately called Martin Wells, the private investigator, who had continued to review Emma's case periodically over the years. Within days, Wells began filing Freedom of Information Act requests to access the Caltrans records mentioned by the anonymous caller. Each request was met with bureaucratic resistance. Files were missing, requests were delayed, administrators claimed confusion about which records were being sought. "They're stonewalling us," Wells told Diana 3 months later, after receiving heavily redacted documents that offered little insight. "When we finally got the maintenance logs for that week, the pages covering the day of Emma's disappearance had allegedly been lost during a file transfer." Wells' attempts to re-interview Caltrans employees who had worked in the region that night yielded equally frustrating results. 3 had retired and moved to other states, while a 4th, James Saunders, had died in a car accident in 1988. "It's like hitting a brick wall," Wells admitted, his frustration evident. "But the fact that they're working so hard to obstruct us suggests there's something to find." An unexpected breakthrough came from Carol Bennett, Emma's former co-worker at the Nepenthe restaurant. Now a mother of 3 in Carmel, Carol had been cleaning her attic when she discovered a box of mementos from her waitressing days. "I found this last week," she told Melissa, handing over a cassette tape. "It's Emma's voice. I thought you might want to have it." That evening, Diana, Melissa, and Wells gathered in the Sullivan living room, an almost reverent silence falling as they inserted the tape into an old player. Emma's clear voice filled the room, initially rehearsing lines for Waiting for Godot, but then shifting to casual conversation. "I've been noticing something weird on Highway 1 lately," Emma's voice said, causing Diana to gasp audibly. "These strange trucks, always after 10 at night. I think they're dumping something on the slopes. I've seen it 3 times in the past week. I'm going to take some pictures next time, just to satisfy my curiosity." The following day, Diana brought the tape to Sheriff Michael Torres, who had replaced Harrington after his retirement. Torres, a younger man with a military haircut and carefully neutral expression, listened to the recording, then shook his head apologetically. "Mrs. Sullivan, I understand your persistence, but a vague mention of trucks doesn't constitute evidence of a crime," he explained. "The most probable theory remains that your daughter was a victim of the storm that night." The authorities' continued reluctance to seriously reopen the case led Diana to take more drastic measures. With Melissa's help, now an assistant editor at the Herald, she organized a press conference in front of the regional Caltrans office in Monterey in 1997. "My daughter disappeared 13 years ago, and I believe Caltrans possesses crucial information that is being deliberately concealed," Diana declared to the cameras, her frail but determined figure capturing the attention of regional media. While the press conference generated a brief flurry of activity that soon dissipated, it established Diana as a relentless adversary against what she viewed as an institutional cover-up. Few days later, an anonymous box arrived at the Monterey Herald newsroom addressed to Melissa Sullivan. Inside was a weathered logbook, apparently belonging to a Caltrans employee named Ray Mendez, one of those who had retired and moved away shortly after Emma's disappearance. The authorities' refusal to seriously reopen the case led Diana to a drastic decision. If the system wouldn't help her discover what happened to her daughter, she would expose the truth publicly, without imagining that her next action would trigger a violent reaction from powerful people who had spent a decade believing their secret was safe under tons of rock on Highway 1. The morning sun cast long shadows across the concrete steps of the regional Caltrans office, as Diana Sullivan methodically pinned her daughter's photo to her lapel. The small brooch had become her talisman over 13 years of searching, a tangible connection to Emma that she carried close to her heart. Her hands, now showing the first signs of age with prominent veins and slight tremors, smoothed down her carefully chosen navy suit. "Are you ready for this?" Melissa asked, approaching her mother with a clipboard of press materials. At 32, she had grown into a formidable journalist. Her youthful features hardened somewhat by years of professional skepticism and personal grief. Diana nodded, her eyes fixed on the Caltrans building. "I've been ready for 13 years. Outside the government building, Melissa had arranged a semicircle of reporters and camera operators from various regional outlets. As the assistant editor of the Monterey Herald, she wielded enough influence to ensure decent coverage, methodically distributing folders containing a detailed timeline of Emma's case and the pattern of obstruction they had encountered. "My mother will make a brief statement, then take a few questions," she informed the assembled press, her professional demeanor masking her personal stake in the story. At precisely 11 o'clock, Diana Sullivan took her position at the small, improvised podium. Despite her slight frame, she projected an unmistakable determination that instantly commanded attention. "My daughter disappeared 13 years ago, and I believe Caltrans possesses crucial information that is being deliberately concealed," Diana declared, her voice steady despite the emotion behind her words. Emma Sullivan was not simply a victim of bad weather. Something happened on Highway 1 that night that powerful people don't want revealed. From the second-floor windows of the Caltrans building, several executives watched with tense expressions. A gray-haired man in a tailored suit made a hurried phone call, his back turned to the window as he spoke in urgent, hushed tones. Standing at the edge of the gathering crowd, Robert Sullivan watched his ex-wife with conflicted emotions. Beside him, his new wife Christine squeezed his hand supportively. Though he had rebuilt his life, he wouldn't, abandon this part of his past. Diana's unwavering certainty both frustrated and impressed him. Sometimes he envied her absolute conviction that Emma could still be found. 3 days after the press conference, Melissa was reviewing the next day's layout when her assistant placed a plain cardboard box on her desk. "This came for you," he said. "No return address." Inside the unmarked package, Melissa found a weathered logbook with the name Ray Mendez inscribed on the cover. Her heart racing, she carefully opened it, scanning the entries until October 1984 caught her eye. There, in faded blue ink, was an entry dated October 17th. "Garota no Mustang vermelho parou no mirante, parecia estar tirando fotos. JS disse para eu não me preocupar. Ele cuidaria disso. Tempestade piorando." Even with her rusty Portuguese from a college elective, Melissa could translate the devastating entry. "Girl in red Mustang stopped at the lookout, seemed to be taking photos. JS said not to worry, he would take care of it. Storm worsening." Within an hour, Melissa and Martin Wells were huddled in a corner booth at Fisherman's Wharf Cafe, analyzing the logbook's contents. "JS has to be James Saunders," Wells said, his laptop open to personnel records he'd obtained years earlier. "He was a senior supervisor for Caltrans in that region at the time," Melissa typed furiously on her notepad, "and he conveniently died in a car accident in 1988, right when people might have started asking questions." "This is it, Melissa," Wells said, his voice low but intense. "This is the first concrete evidence linking Emma's disappearance to Caltrans operations that night." That evening, Diana could barely contain her excitement as she spoke with a Los Angeles Times reporter by phone. "Finally, we have concrete evidence. Something happened that night that Caltrans doesn't want us to know about," she said, hope energizing her voice for the first time in years. 2 weeks later, after tracing Ray Mendez to a retirement community outside Phoenix, Melissa and Wells checked into a budget motel to prepare for their confrontation. The desert heat was oppressive even in the air-conditioned room as they reviewed their questions and tested their recording equipment. "Remember, we don't accuse him directly," Wells cautioned. "We're just asking him to verify the logbook." The following morning, They approached Mendez's modest stucco house. The former Caltrans employee, now in his 70s with thinning white hair and deeply lined face, tensed visibly when Melissa introduced herself. "I don't know anything about any logbook," he insisted, standing on his porch with the screen door between them. "That's a forgery. Someone's trying to frame me." Melissa held up a plastic-sleeved copy of the October 17th entry. "Mr. Mendez, we just want to verify if this is your handwriting. It could help us understand what happened to my sister." Mendez's hand trembled noticeably as he glanced at the page, his face paling despite his continued denials. "I told you, I don't know anything. Leave me alone before you get hurt too." With that cryptic warning, he slammed the door, leaving Melissa and Wells standing in the punishing Arizona sun. Back in Monterey, Diana spread newspaper clippings about this new development across her kitchen table, her energy renewed by this tangible lead. The phone rang just after midnight, jolting her awake from where she'd dozed off amid her research. "You don't know who you're messing with," a distorted voice warned. "Think about your other daughter." Diana's hand shook as she hung up the phone. Within minutes, she had called both Melissa and Wells, arranging an emergency meeting at her home. As dawn broke over Monterey Bay, the three sat around the kitchen table, coffee growing cold before them, as they debated their next steps. "We're closer than ever," Diana insisted, though fear flickered unmistakably in her eyes. "We can't back down now." "But this threat against me changes things," Melissa argued, her journalist's instinct for a story warring with genuine concern. "These people have already killed once to keep their secret." Wells looked between mother and daughter, then at the evidence spread before them. "Whatever they're hiding, it's big enough to kill for, and to threaten for, even 13 years later." What began as the closure of a nearly two-decade case suddenly transformed into a dangerous new investigation, with Melissa and Diana now targeting some of Silicon Valley's most powerful executives. And when the Herald published its first bombshell article implicating technology CEOs in the illegal disposal scheme that killed Emma, the threats didn't take long to arrive, proving that even after 25 years, there were still people willing to do anything to keep their secrets buried. The dawn of March 5, 2002, painted the Central California coast in watercolor pastels as Diana Sullivan's aging sedan wound along Highway 1. Melissa sat beside her, both women silent, minds racing with possibilities. 18 years of searching, of hope alternating with despair, had culminated in a phone call neither had dared to imagine would ever come. "The GPS says we're almost there," Melissa said softly, breaking the silence as they approached a section of road blocked by yellow police tape. Several official vehicles and construction equipment formed a perimeter around a rocky outcropping. Diana's hands tightened on the steering wheel. After all this time, Michael Chen, a young civil engineer with the California Department of Transportation, approached as they parked. His expression conveyed the gravity of what awaited them. "Mrs. Sullivan, Ms. Sullivan," he greeted them with a respectful nod. "Thank you for coming so quickly." Leading them toward a makeshift tent protecting an excavation site, Chen explained, "We began preliminary exploration for the road expansion last week. Ground-penetrating radar detected a metallic anomaly beneath this rock formation. Initially, we thought it might be old construction debris, but—" He hesitated, looking at Diana with evident compassion. "Yesterday, we managed to remove part of the rocks. It's a car roof. Red." Diana clutched Melissa's arm, her legs suddenly unsteady. "It's her, isn't it? You found my Emma." Sheriff Torres approached, accompanied by 2 FBI agents in dark suits who had arrived the previous night. Despite the years of dismissing Diana's theories, Torres's expression now held a mixture of deference and regret. "Mrs. Sullivan, we haven't confirmed the vehicle's identity yet," Torres said cautiously. "The FBI is taking over the investigation due to certain complications." "What complications?" Melissa asked, her journalist's instinct cutting through her personal anguish. Special Agent Lisa Morales, A Latina woman in her mid-40s, with a determined expression, stepped forward. Preliminary evidence suggests this wasn't a simple accident. The rockslide pattern is inconsistent with natural events. We need to proceed with extreme caution during recovery. Over the following days, specialized forensic recovery teams meticulously removed tons of rock and soil without compromising potential evidence. Diana refused to leave, taking a room at a small hotel in Big Sur, keeping vigil at the site from dawn until dusk each day. Robert joined them on the second day, his face weathered by years, but set with determination to see this through to its conclusion. "I never stopped looking for answers," he told Diana quietly, as they stood side by side watching the excavation. "Just in different ways." On the fourth day of excavation, confirmation came. The partially exposed vehicle's license plate matched Emma Sullivan's Mustang. "Now we need to prepare for what we might find, Dr. I." Eleanor Takahashi, the forensic anthropologist assigned to the case, gently advised Diana. "After so much time—" "I've waited 18 years, Diana replied firmly. "I can handle the truth, whatever it may be." As more of the vehicle was exposed, disturbing details emerged. The car hadn't simply fallen from the road, it was positioned almost perpendicular to the slope, as if deliberately pushed downward and then covered by the landslide. Geological analyses later confirmed that the slide occurred at approximately 11 p.m. on October 17, 1984, coinciding with the estimated time of Emma's disappearance. By the seventh day, when they finally accessed the severely compressed vehicle interior, they found Emma's remains still secured by the seatbelt. But it was what they discovered in the intact glove compartment that sent shockwaves through the investigation team. A Nikon camera, wrapped in a sealed plastic bag, apparently placed there by Emma moments before the incident. The photos, developed in an FBI laboratory, showed a disturbing sequence. Caltrans trucks dumping barrels with toxic material markings on an unauthorized area of the slope, with employees clearly visible, supervising the operation. The final photo showed a man looking directly at the camera, James Saunders, the supervisor who would later die in a supposed accident. "She documented everything," Melissa whispered, looking at the photos with horror and vindication. "And they killed her for it." The investigation expanded rapidly. The FBI obtained warrants to access all Caltrans records related to that region between 1982 and 1986. Soil samples from the area where the barrels were photographed revealed alarming levels of industrial chemicals, consistent with semiconductor manufacturing waste, a growing industry in Silicon Valley at that time. Former Caltrans employees began coming forward, especially after immunity offers for cooperative witnesses. A disturbing pattern emerged. The agency had participated in an illegal waste disposal scheme for technology companies, saving millions in proper elimination costs. The chosen sites were typically remote areas along Highway 1, where natural landslides would eventually bury the containers. Emma was in the wrong place at the wrong time, Agent Morales explained during a private meeting with the Sullivan family. "We believe she stopped to photograph the sunset, something she did frequently according to her friends, and accidentally captured the dumping operation. Saunders saw her and made a terrible decision." A grand jury was convened in June 2002. 3 former high-ranking Caltrans officials were indicted for manslaughter, obstruction of justice, and environmental crimes. 2 technology company executives faced charges related to illegal waste disposal. The case attracted national attention, exposing decades of environmental negligence and government corruption. For Diana Sullivan, the confirmation of Emma's death brought a whirlwind of contradictory emotions. There was relief in finally knowing the truth and validation of her suspicions that something more sinister had occurred. But there was also renewed grief in losing definitively the hope of finding Emma alive. While the FBI agents expanded their investigation, obtaining warrants for all Caltrans records between 1982 and 1986, Diana Sullivan observed the frenzied activity around her with a mixture of vindication and devastating pain. Finally, she knew what had happened to her daughter, but now faced a new and terrible reality. Emma hadn't simply disappeared, she had been deliberately silenced, and those responsible for her death had walked free for almost 2 decades. The FBI field office in San Francisco buzzed with activity as agents transformed a conference room into a war room for the Sullivan case. Maps of California's Central Coast lined the walls, photos of Caltrans employees connected to technology executives with red string, and timelines stretched across whiteboards. Agent Morales stood at the center, directing the investigation with methodical precision. "I want every Caltrans employee who worked that region between 82 and 86 interviewed," she instructed the assembled team. "Start with those who've left the agency. They'll be more likely to talk." In a sterile interview room down the hall, a former Caltrans maintenance worker named Thomas Reeves fidgeted nervously as Morales slid a photo of Emma Sullivan across the table. "I've already told you, I don't know anything about that girl," he insisted, avoiding eye contact. Morales leaned forward. "We can offer immunity, Mr. Reeves, but only to the first few who cooperate." She paused deliberately. "Your colleagues are in other rooms having this same conversation right now." The man's resolve crumbled visibly. It was routine, he finally confessed, his voice barely above a whisper. 2 times a month, always at night, always in isolated stretches. The tech companies paid Caltrans supervisors to look the other way. Across town, in a state-of-the-art laboratory, an environmental scientist explained her findings to Melissa Sullivan, who had insisted on being present for the soil analysis. "These samples from the area, in your sister's photographs, contain polychlorinated biphenyls, heavy metals, and industrial solvents," the technician explained, pointing to chemical signatures on a computer screen. "Typical waste from semiconductor manufacturing, extremely toxic and expensive to dispose of legally." Melissa's throat tightened. "And they just dumped it along the coastline? How many people could have been exposed?" "That's what we're trying to determine now," the scientist replied grimly. "The environmental impact assessment is ongoing." At a high-end San Francisco hotel the following week, Diana and Melissa met with federal prosecutors to discuss the rapidly expanding case. The oak-paneled conference room felt too formal for such a deeply personal conversation. Catherine Zhang, the lead federal prosecutor, spread photos from Emma's camera across the table. "Your daughter was photographing the sunset, something friends said she did frequently, and accidentally captured their operation," she explained gently. "The timing was tragically perfect. They were mid-disposal when Emma stopped at that lookout point." Diana traced her finger lightly over a photo showing Emma's handwriting on the film sleeve. She labeled it, "Strange Activity, Highway 1, Oct. 17. She knew something wasn't right. Later that evening, Diana sat alone in her hotel room, spreading copies of Emma's photos across the bed, studying each detail as if she could extract more truths from them. Melissa knocked softly before entering with 2 cups of tea. "Mom," she said, settling beside Diana. "The prosecutor believes they have enough for convictions. Emma's photos are irrefutable evidence." Diana nodded, not looking up from the images. 18 years, Melissa. 18 years while they went about their lives, got promotions, attended their children's graduations, all while Emma was buried under those rocks. 50 miles south in Monterey, Robert sat with his wife Christine in their living room, watching the evening news report on the arrests of 2 former Caltrans officials. Emma's photo appeared on screen, the same one Diana had carried to countless television appearances over the years. Robert wiped away silent tears. "I always thought we'd never know," he whispered as Christine held his hand. "Part of me had accepted that. I don't know if that makes me weaker or stronger than Diana." The following morning, news cameras captured Howard Griffin, former regional director of Caltrans for the Central Coast, being led from his Palm Springs retirement home in handcuffs. The 73-year-old's weathered face registered shock as reporters shouted questions about Emma Sullivan. Back at FBI headquarters, Agent Morales made a breakthrough discovery while reviewing documents obtained through their latest warrant. She found a memo dated October 19, 1984, just 2 days after Emma's disappearance, in which Griffin instructed Saunders to ensure all maintenance records for Area B7 for the current week are reviewed for consistency, and to handle any personal items found in the vicinity through appropriate channels. This directly connects Griffin to the cover-up, Morales told Prosecutor Zhang during their evening briefing. He knew about Emma within 48 hours of her disappearance. Zhang nodded, making notes in her case file. We have evidence not just of manslaughter, but of a conspiracy to obstruct justice that lasted decades. I'll present this to the grand jury tomorrow. 1 month later, Diana visited the site where Emma's Mustang had been found. The area had become an impromptu memorial, with flowers left by local residents, theater patrons who remembered her performances, and strangers touched by her story. Diana placed a small framed photo of Emma against a rock. "We found you," she whispered, "just like I promised." At the Monterey Herald offices, Melissa worked late into the night on a comprehensive article about the case. Her editor stood beside her desk, reading over her shoulder. "This is your story to tell, Sullivan," he said quietly. No one else could do it with the same perspective. As the investigation progressed and more defendants were identified, Diana Sullivan faced a painful choice she never imagined having to make. The federal prosecutor offered plea deals to some defendants in exchange for testimony against the scheme's masterminds, a bargain that could ensure convictions for the main responsible parties, but would mean reduced sentences for those who helped cover up Emma's death for almost 2 decades. Diana weighed the prosecutor's offer, her hands trembling slightly as she held the legal document. The choice before her seemed impossible. Allow plea deals for those who had helped cover up her daughter's death in exchange for securing convictions against the masterminds, or insist on maximum charges for everyone involved and risk losing the entire case. April 3, 2003 dawned clear and crisp as crowds gathered outside the federal courthouse in San Francisco. Journalists and camera crews clustered on the stone steps, their equipment glinting in the morning light. Diana, Robert, and Melissa ascended the steps together, their family unity restored by the shared pursuit of justice that had eluded them for nearly 2 decades. Inside the wood-paneled courtroom, Howard Griffin sat impassively at the defense table, his expensive suit failing to disguise how much he had aged since his arrest. At 73, the former regional director of Caltrans appeared smaller than his photographs, his shoulders hunched as if already bearing the weight of his impending sentence. When Diana Sullivan was called to testify, she walked deliberately to the witness stand, her spine straight despite the years of grief that had bent her spirit. Her voice, initially tremulous, gained strength with each word. "How does one measure almost 2 decades of uncertainty?" she began, looking directly at the jury. "Each birthday without her, each Christmas with a wrapped present that would never be opened. My husband and I separated under the weight of this absence. My younger daughter dedicated her career to keeping her sister's memory alive." Diana paused, turning her gaze toward Griffin, who refused to meet her eyes. But the worst was never knowing. Waking up each morning for 6,575 consecutive days, and for a brief moment before reality set in, thinking that maybe today would be the day. Throughout the following days, the prosecution methodically built their case. A geologist demonstrated with detailed diagrams how the landslide had been artificially induced, using explosives strategically placed to mimic natural rock movement. Former Caltrans employees, protected by immunity agreements, described the toxic waste disposal scheme in damning detail. On the trial's 4th day, Raymond Mendez took the stand, finally acknowledging the authenticity of the diary that had provided the first concrete lead years earlier. His weathered face contorted with long-suppressed guilt as he spoke. "We were dumping the containers like we did twice a month, when Saunders noticed a girl taking photos from a lookout point," Mendez testified, his voice barely audible. "He sent everyone away except Peterson, his assistant. I went back to base, but the next morning, when we heard about the landslide, Saunders gathered us and said it had been a tragic accident and that nobody should mention having seen the red Mustang. The courtroom fell into absolute silence when Prosecutor Zhang projected Emma's recovered photographs onto a large screen. The sequential images showed Caltrans trucks positioned near the edge of a cliff, workers unloading barrels marked with hazardous waste symbols, and supervisors directing the operation. The final image, taken at 10:17 that night, according to the camera's timestamp, showed James Saunders approaching the camera, his face contorted with rage and determination. This photograph was taken just 43 minutes before the artificially induced landslide that buried Emma Sullivan's vehicle, Zhang explained to the transfixed jury. During cross-examination, Griffin's defense attorney attempted to distance his client from direct involvement. "My client wasn't present at the site and had no direct knowledge of what happened to Miss Sullivan," he argued, his tone reasonable and measured. The decisive moment came when Zhang presented the internal memo dated October 19, 1984, in which Griffin instructed Saunders to ensure all maintenance records for Area B7 for the current week are reviewed for consistency and to handle any personal items found in the vicinity through appropriate channels. The defendant didn't just know what had happened to Emma Sullivan, Zhang declared in her closing argument, her voice carrying controlled indignation. He actively orchestrated the cover-up that allowed a family to suffer in agony for 18 years, while the true perpetrators of her death remained in positions of power and authority. As the jury filed out for deliberation, Diana clasped Robert's hand on one side and Melissa's on the other. The three Sullivans, separated for years by grief and differing approaches to their loss, now formed a united front as they awaited the verdict that would define their future relationship with the past. After 14 hours of deliberation, the jury returned. The courtroom hushed as the foreman stood. In the case of United States versus Howard Griffin, we find the defendant guilty on all charges. Diana closed her eyes, silent tears streaming down her face, as the words she had waited 18 years to hear finally resonated through the courtroom. "Howard Griffin," the judge pronounced a week later during sentencing, "this court sentences you to 25 years in a federal penal institution for the crimes of manslaughter, conspiracy to obstruct justice, and environmental violations resulting in death." Outside the courthouse, standing before a forest of microphones, Diana, Robert, and Melissa stood shoulder to shoulder with Prosecutor Zhang and Agent Morales, thanking everyone who had helped bring justice for Emma. That night, Diana sat alone in Emma's preserved bedroom, speaking softly as if her daughter could hear her. "We did it, sweetheart. They won't get away with what they did to you anymore." With the trial concluded and the guilty finally held accountable, the Sullivan family faced a ritual they had postponed for almost 2 decades. On a sunny afternoon in October 2003, exactly 19 years after her disappearance, Emma Sullivan would finally be laid to rest in the Pacific Grove Memorial Gardens, allowing her family to begin transforming decades of anguished searching into a meaningful legacy that would honor her memory. Workers arrived at Pacific Grove Memorial Gardens before dawn, their movements reverent and deliberate as they prepared the burial site overlooking the Pacific Ocean that Emma had so loved. They arranged white chairs in a semicircle, positioning each one to face both the small bronze urn and the endless blue horizon beyond. Morning fog clung to the cypress trees, gradually burning away as the October sun climbed higher, as if nature itself were setting the stage for Emma Sullivan's final farewell. In her bedroom, Diana Sullivan carefully applied her makeup, her hands steadier than they had been in years. She smoothed the fabric of her navy blue dress, adjusting the silver locket containing Emma's photo that had rarely left her neck in 19 years. "Emma always said black was too somber," Diana explained to Melissa, who stood in the doorway wearing a deep green dress. "She would have wanted colors at her goodbye." Melissa nodded, understanding. "The theater group is bringing flowers, all the bright ones they could find." At the cemetery, Robert arrived an hour early, pausing briefly at the entrance to gather his composure. He approached the small altar where Emma's bronze urn waited, decorated with engraved stars, a nod to her Hollywood dreams. With gentle movements, he placed a single white rose beside it, his weathered face reflecting both the suffering of the past 2 decades and a newfound serenity that came with closure. "I wish we'd found you sooner," he whispered to the urn, "but at least now we know." By mid-morning, cars lined the coastal road leading to the cemetery. Hundreds of people made their way up the gentle slope. Former classmates, colleagues from the Nepenthe restaurant, theater patrons who remembered Emma's performances, and countless strangers touched by her story through years of media coverage. A group of elderly actors from the Golden Bough Theater arrived together, carrying a framed poster from Waiting for Godot, Emma's final production. "She would have made it big," one of them remarked, placing the poster near the urn. "She had that quality you can't teach." As the ceremony began, Diana approached the podium, her voice clear and strong despite the emotion evident in her eyes. She unfolded a worn page from Emma's journal, handling it with the care one might give a sacred text. "I want to create characters that make people feel something real," Diana read, "that make them look at the world differently when they leave the theater." She paused, looking up at the gathered mourners. Emma wrote this in 1984, just months before she disappeared. Robert joined Diana at the podium, his presence beside her, a visual representation of their reconciliation through shared purpose. She didn't know then that she would make a difference not through her acting, but through her courage that dark night on Highway 1, he added. Emma's legacy changed California's environmental laws and exposed decades of corruption. Melissa followed her parents, clutching the teddy bear that she and Emma had shared as children. "Emma taught me to be brave," she said, her professional composure momentarily cracking. "To stand up for what's right, even when it seems impossible. I've carried that lesson through my entire career, and now I'm teaching it to my daughter, her namesake." A respectful hush fell over the gathering as a cellist began playing Clair de Lune, Emma's favorite piece. The melancholy notes floated across the cemetery as the sun broke through a brief opening in the clouds, casting a spotlight-like beam on the urn, in a moment so perfectly timed it seemed almost cinematographic. When the music ended, Diana approached the urn, placing beside it a small copy of the Waiting for Godot script, the last play in which Emma performed. With this final act, Emma Sullivan was laid to rest, 19 years after her disappearance. The reception afterward at the Nepenthe restaurant transformed the solemn occasion into a celebration of Emma's life. The restaurant where she had once worked as a waitress was filled with photographs, home videos, and shared stories that painted a vivid picture of the vibrant young woman whose life had been cut short. Diana found herself in conversation with Martin Wells, the investigator who had never completely abandoned the case throughout the years. "I've been thinking about the foundation," she told him, nursing a glass of the Napa Valley Chardonnay that Emma had purchased to celebrate her audition success. "I want scholarships for young actresses and funding for environmental whistleblowers. I want her to continue making a difference." Wells nodded approvingly. She would have liked that. As sunset approached, Robert and Diana found themselves sitting side by side on the restaurant's deck, watching the ocean turn golden in the fading light. No words were needed as they shared a moment of silent reconciliation, their decades-long journey of grief, separation, and finally justice, creating an unspoken bond that even their divorce couldn't sever. "I always knew you'd find her," Robert said finally, breaking the comfortable silence. "I just didn't know how to keep believing as strongly as you did." Diana smiled faintly. "We all found her, in our own ways." Driving home after the funeral, Diana made an unplanned detour, pulling over at the same Highway 1 lookout point where Emma had stopped that fateful night. The spot, now marked with flowers left by people who knew her story, offered a breathtaking view of the coastline. Diana stood at the guardrail, feeling closer to Emma than she had in 19 years. In the months following the funeral, as Diana transformed her pain into purpose through the Emma Sullivan Foundation, and Melissa began researching a book about the family's journey, neither could have predicted how Emma's legacy would grow beyond Monterey, or that the story wouldn't end with the burial and convictions, as one of the darkest secrets of the case was still waiting to be discovered, buried not under rocks, but in corporate archives that someone finally had the courage to expose. Diana stood at the foot of Emma's grave, watching as the caretaker carefully positioned the permanent headstone that had just arrived. The polished granite marker read simply, "Emma Rose Sullivan, 1959-1984, beloved daughter, sister, truth seeker." 3 months had passed since they had finally laid Emma to rest, and Diana found herself visiting the cemetery at least twice weekly, sometimes to talk to her daughter, other times simply to sit in peaceful contemplation. "It's beautiful," the caretaker said, stepping back to admire his work. "Simple, but meaningful," Diana nodded, running her fingers across the engraved letters. "Just like her." The Emma Sullivan Foundation began in a single rented room above a bookstore in downtown Monterey. Diana spent the first weeks after the funeral meticulously organizing applications for the inaugural theater scholarship, reviewing each aspiring actress's portfolio with the careful attention of someone who understood exactly what dreams they carried. 27 applicants for the first round, Diana told Melissa during a phone call that evening. "Some of these young women remind me so much of Emma. That same fire, that determination." The Foundation's first board meeting took place on a rainy February afternoon in 2004. Diana sat at the head of a conference table surrounded by those who had been instrumental in finding justice for Emma: Melissa, Martin Wells, Catherine Zhang, who had prosecuted the case, and several environmental activists and theater professionals who had volunteered their expertise. "Our mission is twofold," Diana explained, distributing folders containing the Foundation's newly created bylaws. "To support young actresses through education and professional development, and to advocate for stronger environmental protection laws, particularly relating to corporate waste disposal." By spring, the Foundation had selected its first scholarship recipient, Lucia Mendez, a talented 18-year-old from a working-class neighborhood in Salinas, who dreamed of studying at the American Conservatory Theater in San Francisco. Diana stood on the small stage of a local community theater, presenting the award to the tearful young woman. "Emma would have been 45 this year," Diana said during the presentation. "Perhaps she would have been a renowned actress, perhaps a director or teacher, we'll never know, but through you and the others who will follow, her spirit for storytelling continues." Meanwhile, Melissa converted her home office into a research center for the book she had begun writing about her family's 2-decade search for Emma. Her desk disappeared beneath stacks of newspaper clippings, court transcripts, and interview recordings. A large corkboard on the wall contained a detailed timeline of events, with red strings connecting related incidents in a visual representation of the investigation. Each evening, after putting her daughter to bed, Melissa would spend hours organizing her notes and drafting chapters, a framed childhood photo of herself and Emma prominently displayed beside her computer. "I'm telling your story, sis," she would whisper sometimes, when the weight of the task seemed overwhelming. That summer, Robert volunteered at the Foundation's first beach cleanup event, proudly wearing a t-shirt bearing the organization's logo, a silhouette of a woman with a camera against a sunset backdrop. He found unexpected healing in these practical environmental efforts, feeling connected to Emma with each piece of trash removed from the coastline she had loved. "This section of beach is where we used to bring the girls when they were little," he told a young volunteer who worked alongside him. "Emma would always find the most unusual shells." In Sacramento, Diana testified before a state legislative committee considering the Environmental Whistleblower Protection Act, which would come to be known as Emma's Law. Despite her nervousness in the formal setting, her testimony proved powerful in its simple authenticity. "My daughter didn't set out to be an environmental whistleblower," she told the legislators, her voice occasionally trembling, but her gaze steady. "She was simply a young woman who noticed something wrong and documented it. That act of conscience cost her life, and it took 18 years to discover the truth. No one should face such consequences for revealing environmental crimes. The moment when California's governor signed Emma's Law in 2005 marked a turning point for Diana. As she stood beside him for the ceremonial signing, receiving the pen he had used as a memento, she felt a sense of purpose that had been missing since the trial's conclusion. Emma's death had not only been avenged, but had now created protections that would prevent similar tragedies. At the Monterey Herald, Melissa had risen to become editor-in-chief, her experiences giving her a unique perspective on investigative journalism. One afternoon, she found herself guiding a young reporter who was investigating suspicious waste disposal activities along the coast near Santa Cruz. "Always follow the documentation," Melissa advised, "and trust your instincts when something doesn't add up. The truth leaves traces, even when people try to bury it." Little Emma Sullivan Ramirez, now 5 years old with her aunt's auburn hair and curious spirit, often visited Diana's house where she would carefully page through photo albums, asking questions about the aunt she had never met but whose name she carried. "Was Aunt Emma brave?" she asked Diana one afternoon. "Very brave," Diana replied, her heart full as she watched Emma's namesake. "And because of her bravery, many people's lives are better now." That December, Diana received a National Environmental Activism Award at a ceremony in Washington, D.C. Standing at the podium before hundreds of activists and legislators, she spoke from the heart. "Emma never planned to be an environmental whistleblower," she said, her voice carrying clearly through the hushed ballroom. "But her legacy has saved countless lives and protected precious ecosystems. One person with a camera and the courage to document wrongdoing changed everything." Late one evening, as Melissa was finalizing an editorial in her office, an anonymous email appeared in her inbox. "What you discovered was just the tip of the iceberg. I have documents showing the scheme was coordinated by the highest executives. Meet me if you want the full story." See you were. What began as the closure of a case that had spanned nearly 2 decades suddenly transformed into a dangerous new investigation, with Melissa and Diana now targeting some of Silicon Valley's most powerful executives, and when the first bombshell article from the Herald was published implicating technology CEOs in the illegal disposal scheme that killed Emma, the threats didn't take long to arrive, proving that even after 25 years, there were still people willing to do anything to keep their secrets buried. The whistleblower's documents proved far more explosive than Melissa had initially imagined. For 3 weeks, she worked with a small, trusted team of investigative journalists in a secured conference room at the Herald, meticulously verifying every memo, email, and financial record before moving forward with publication. "Are we absolutely certain these connections are solid?" Melissa asked her senior reporter, Kate Donovan, as they reviewed the final draft. "Once we publish this, there's no going back." Kate nodded, tapping a highlighted section of a corporate memo. 3 separate sources confirmed this meeting occurred. The paper trail connects directly to the CEO. On January 17, 2017, the Monterey Herald's front page carried the headline that would send shockwaves through Silicon Valley. "New documents reveal tech CEOs orchestrated toxic disposal that killed Emma Sullivan." The accompanying article, carefully crafted under Melissa's supervision, detailed how executives at 3 prominent technology companies had not merely known about the illegal disposal, but had actively designed the system to maximize profits while minimizing paper trails. The morning after publication, Diana opened her front door to find a court summons, one of the implicated companies seeking an immediate injunction to prevent further articles in what they termed a defamatory series based on fraudulent documents. "They're trying to silence us," Diana told Martin Wells over the phone, "just like they silenced Emma." 3 days later, Melissa appeared on the Today Show, defending her investigation as the host read corporate statements, vehemently denying the allegations. "These documents speak for themselves," Melissa stated firmly, her composure unshakable after decades of fighting for her sister's truth. They show a systematic effort by technology executives to dispose of dangerous chemicals illegally, resulting in environmental damage that continues to this day, and directly led to my sister's death when she accidentally documented their operation. An emergency meeting of the Emma Sullivan Foundation Board was called to address the legal threats and media firestorm. Now housed in its own offices overlooking Monterey Bay, the foundation had grown into a respected organization with significant influence in both environmental policy and arts education circles. "We anticipated pushback," Diana told the assembled board members. "But we didn't expect them to attack so aggressively. They've filed lawsuits against the Herald, the foundation, and Melissa personally." 2 FBI agents visited Melissa the following week, requesting access to the original documents provided by the whistleblower. "We're opening a new investigation based on your published evidence," the senior agent explained. "These allegations, if proven, constitute conspiracy charges that weren't covered in the original case." The federal courthouse in San Francisco was packed when Judge Eleanor Simmons heard arguments regarding the injunction requested by the technology companies. After 2 days of testimony, she delivered her ruling. "The public interest in the truth about this case outweighs any corporate defamation concerns," she stated firmly. "The injunction is denied, and the Herald may continue its reporting." By summer, Melissa's book, 25 Years Missing: The Search for Emma Sullivan and the Buried Truth, was published to critical acclaim and immediate commercial success. On release day, a line of people stretched around the block at Monterey's largest bookstore, many carrying old newspaper clippings or photographs of Emma they had saved through the years. Diana read a passage to the emotional audience. "My sister dreamed of telling stories that mattered. In the end, it was her own story that changed how we view corporate responsibility and environmental accountability." In October, national news broadcasts showed FBI agents escorting 2 former Silicon Valley CEOs from their mansions in handcuffs. The charges: conspiracy, environmental violations, and obstruction of justice related to Emma's case. Diana watched the footage with a complex mixture of vindication and sorrow, knowing that no amount of justice could bring back her daughter. The following spring, award-winning documentary filmmaker Sophia Chen began production on the film adaptation of Melissa's book. Her crew filmed interviews with Diana and Melissa at the actual locations where the events had occurred, including the lookout point on Highway 1, where Emma had stopped to take her fateful photographs. "What does it feel like?" Chen asked Diana during an emotional interview, "to see your daughter's story finally told in full after all these years?" Diana considered the question carefully. "It feels like the completion of a promise I made to Emma the day after she disappeared, that I would find her, no matter what. It took much longer than I ever imagined, but a mother's love doesn't recognize time." The documentary premiered at the Sundance Film Festival in January 2018, receiving a standing ovation that lasted nearly 5 minutes. Cameras captured Diana's silent tears as she absorbed the impact her daughter's life and death had made on complete strangers. In his home 40 miles away, Robert watched the documentary with his grandchildren gathered around him. At 78, he had found peace with the past, while maintaining his connection to Emma's legacy through regular volunteer work with the foundation. "Your great-aunt Emma was very brave," he told the children as the credits rolled. "Sometimes one person can change the world just by noticing something wrong and having the courage to document it." On what would have been Emma's 58th birthday, Diana, now 83, made her way slowly to the Highway 1 lookout where her daughter had stopped that October night in 1984. A small bronze plaque, installed by the California Parks Department, now marked the spot. "In memory of Emma Sullivan, 1959-1984, actress, daughter, sister, and inadvertent environmental hero, truth like water always finds its way." Diana gently ran her hand over the letters engraved in the metal, feeling the ocean breeze on her face. After decades of searching for answers, she had finally found a form of peace. Emma's story was no longer defined only by her mysterious disappearance, but by the lasting impact of her courage and the unwavering perseverance of a family that refused to give up the search for truth. "We found you, my darling," Diana whispered to the wind. "And now, the world knows who you really were."